excited to welcome you to what is going to be a phenomenal event. I know you're all busy, especially our external visitors, and have a choice of where to be, and we just are really happy that you made the time to come here today. As many of you know, PAI was founded 57 years ago, and we were initially established with the goal of influencing U.S. policy and institutions to really have more robust sexual and reproductive health and rights funding and policies. And over the years, we've really grown and evolved to make sure that we're providing catalytic technical assistance, advocacy, and funding to CSOs and youth-led organizations. This morning, we are so lucky to be welcoming Christina Chilimba, who is the founder and executive director of All for Youth from Malawi, and to really hear from her about experiences, best practices, and opportunities for better engaging youth-led organizations in sexual and reproductive health and rights. And she will be joined in a discussion by our Vice President of Policy and Advocacy, Christina Weggs, and our wonderful President and CEO, Nabiha Kazi-Hutchins. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Nabiha to the stage. He'll make a few remarks. We will make time for all of you to engage in conversation at the end, so please keep those questions in mind for the time. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, that's much better. Thank you so much.
We're the two Christinas.
Yeah. Thank you, Jen, and thank you all for being here. I'm really thrilled that we could come together on the sidelines of the World Bank spring meetings and have our special guest here and really have a conversation about the role of advocates in advancing and protecting progress for people. Several PAI staff and I have been in a range of meetings and events and workshops this week at the bank, whether that was high-level parliamentarian roundtables, discussions during the Civil Society Policy Forum, and also roundtables that were hosted by the World Bank's Board of Directors involving civil society. And there was some consistent, really wonderful takeaways. And one big takeaway for me is that the achievement of development gains, whether that be our mission of sexual and reproductive health and rights, or the achievement of other outcomes where SRHR, sexual and reproductive health and rights, intersects from gender equality to education gains to economic prosperity. To achieve all of these outcomes and more, there is one really critical message: that advocates are crucial to making progress possible. And there's certainly so much progress in bringing civil society together and bringing us at the table, so much that has been done to date, but there's also so much opportunity to continue to invest in advocates, continue to invest in civil society, to proactively engage with civil society in a way that they're not only at the table, but they're also partnering to inform priorities, to shape policy, to ensure that the things that are promised to people to better their health and well-being are delivered upon. When it comes to fighting for sexual and reproductive health and rights here in the United States, as well as abroad, it is really critical, and we know this firsthand, that civil society should be aligned, that we continue to work together, and that we walk forward together. When we walk forward in a way that is defined by trusted partnerships, where we're sharing our mutual strengths, where we're aligning on a journey of impact together that is grounded in equity, the outcomes for people are so much better. And that's precisely what we get to talk about today. I'm really thrilled to have one of PAI's long-standing partners and fellow advocates, Christina Chilimba. She's the founder and executive director of an incredible youth advocacy organization called All for Youth in Malawi. And she's also a powerful and inclusive voice for youth rights. She's worked tirelessly to ensure that people in Malawi and people in the sub-Saharan African continent, and especially youth, have access to information, have access to health services, have access to all that they need to thrive and to achieve their full potential. Now, you don't know this, Christina, but I will share that your country's former president, President Joyce Banda, Her Excellency President Joyce Banda, who is a powerful advocate in her own right, and President Banda came from civil society, told me last year in a visit with her that Christina Chilimba is an example of all that is good. That Christina Chilimba is an example of all that is good about Malawi and the future of Africa. So you have a fan at the highest of levels in the world. I also am very proud to have my esteemed colleague Christina Wegs, who is joining us in this conversation. She serves as PAI's Vice President of Global Programs and Advocacy and is a celebrated and published leader on social accountability and health. She spent over 2 decades. I mean, she's only 16, so she started she started really early. Has spent over 2 decades advocating for sexual and reproductive health and rights, working alongside major global coalitions, working aside incredible civil society networks around the world, advancing a shared agenda for advocacy, ensuring that accountability mechanisms are the responsibility of many, and that goods, services, and rights are delivered by policymakers, by donor institutions, and health systems. At PAI, Christina leads a very robust portfolio of programs that are really focused on expanding civic space and on working in trusted partnership with PAI's vast ecosystem. It's an ecosystem 20 plus years in the making of local community-based organizations who are holding their government accountable, who are ensuring that the voice of people comes to the forefront. Just as PAI, us being a civil society organization, that we do the same with our own US government and on the global stage with global institutions. And among other things, Christina is also at the helm of supporting and leading our work at PAI, and this is the collaboration that we have with the World Bank and the Global Financing Facility. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So Christina and Christina, welcome. And shall we get started?
Yes, thank you.
So Christina, we'll start with you first. I think we'd all love to know, and I love to ask this question, what really inspired you to be an advocate, to start your own youth-based, youth-focused, youth-driven civil society organization in Malawi, and what brings you to Washington, D.C.?
Thank you very much. I feel so welcome. I'm happy, as you can see, I'm a happy person. Well, in terms of my work and how I started, and it's funny that you would say that the former president said that much. I wasn't aware, I wasn't sure. But I went to her school, and in a way, she has mentored me from back then. And I remember that she instilled in me the spirit of you need to give back, the spirit of community. That's what her school was all about. How do you give back to the people, to your loved ones, to even those you don't know? So the spirit of if you see anyone who's less in terms of maybe what they have than what you have, you should learn to give. So I started at a very young age. Every Christmas would go on road trips to give at schools, orphanages. Like, that was something I was used to. Now, growing up, I was like, but I'm missing something. Yes, I went to school, I went to university, finished with a degree in environmental science, and I was working as a chemist for one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies back home. But I felt like I was missing something because, as you can see, I love people, I love talking, I love engaging with people, and that is something that I needed. So fast forward, I ended up going into the field of public health. So I applied for scholarships, fellowships, and I was lucky to be picked for the Graça Machel Trust fellowship, and that really helped me to be mentored by Graça Machel herself. So you can see Joyce Banda, Dr. Joyce Banda, amazing leader. Now I jump, and then Graça Machel, you know, and she's mentoring me, and I'm having one-to-one conversations with her. So really, it grew my passion of loving people, of seeing my fellow young people having the same opportunities that I have, and a heart of just sharing. So every opportunity that I have, I take it back home. So if you look at my track record, even everything that I have learned, if I go for like a policy training, what I would do was then go back to my community and then have groups of young people and then train them on the same, and then we work together. I think that's where maybe my passion has come in, and maybe unknowingly, I guess the notice as well, but it's pretty much been a passion of giving back to community and making sure that other young people have the same access to the opportunities as the same as myself. Yeah, thank you.
So Christina, to you, you've been in the sector for a long time, and so recognized for your experience in social accountability and citizen-driven accountability for sexual and reproductive health and rights. It's also very much at the core of PAI's work, and how we not only hold our own government accountable in the US and international institutions, but also how so many of our partners are driving change in their own context for the good of their own communities. Can you explain what social accountability actually is, and does it make a difference?
Okay, great question. So first, it's so nice to start my day looking out at all of these warm faces, my colleagues. We're so thrilled to have you here, Christina. And really great to have our guests with us as well. So I have been very fortunate, like Christina, of finding my way into public health. And I think when I first came to public health, I was very focused on building health systems, training healthcare providers, working a lot and making sure that there were national policies and budgets in place. But as Christina can tell you, and I know she'll share more about this from Malawi, in the end, those can be promises on paper, and they don't really translate into people's lives being better and people having real meaningful access to health services. And so civil society has a really critical role in being at the table to make sure the right policies are in place, the right funding is in place, even translating that down from the national level to sort of district or subnational level. But in the end, the question is, does that really translate into better lives for people? And what we've seen is that civil society and youth-led organizations like Christina's really understand how health services are serving people and where they're failing. They are able to see who's being left out, who's not being reached. And social accountability creates a space of negotiation where citizens, people, rights holders learn about what their human rights are and even what's on the books in terms of laws and policies. What should they be getting from healthcare services? And then creating a space to actually negotiate to make sure those promises are delivered on. So on the taxi over, we were talking about some mutual colleagues we have in Malawi, and Christina was actually part of this effort, using something called the community scorecard. And it's where groups of people come together and kind of grade how well the healthcare service is working for them. Are young people being reached? Are there stockouts? Are people being charged for services when services should be free? Are services reaching the most rural communities? And then they actually sit down with healthcare providers, local health care authorities, and negotiate for changes. And often this happens in a very collaborative, productive partnership with government. We know that healthcare providers want to do well. There's an example, and I think Christina will know this, where in Malawi, communities identified some really big gaps in access to maternal health services. But one of the issues is there was no ambulance. And healthcare providers said, we want to solve that as much as you do. So collectively, citizens and healthcare providers negotiate with the parliament to get money for an ambulance. So it's focused on people understanding their rights, negotiating, claiming their rights, and generating real world solutions. I think there's another way to think about this too, is sometimes this happens more at the national level. And we have a wonderful colleague, Samasha, who many of you know their work. They're based in Uganda. And they generated a really interesting approach called the motion tracker. And we love our acronyms, we love our words, we love our branded things. So I'm gonna try to explain it in simple English, and I'll have B keep me honest if I use too many acronyms. There's this thing called Family Planning 2030. And it's basically a global movement of people who came together about a decade ago and said, wow, you know, we're underinvesting in one of the most evidence-based, impactful interventions to improve people's lives, which is giving them access to contraception, to decide if and when and how many kids they have. So we need to sort of move this global movement. And donors and national governments, private sector, all agreed to sort of buy into one plan at the national level to strengthen access to rights-based contraception. Our colleagues in Samasha said, well, that's great, but again, if it's just on paper, it doesn't really change lives. And you can make a grand gesture and say, we're gonna increase investments in contraception by 40% in the next 2 years. What Samasha did was actually take those high-level commitments, break them down into smaller pieces that were milestones, and then create a space where citizens got access to data and sat with government and tracked over time. Is this commitment translating not just to a budget promise, but to a budget allocation? Is that budget flowing down to communities? Is that making people's lives better? And so that's been instituted not only in Malawi, but in Uganda, but scaled up now to 7 countries. And is recognized even by governments as such a productive tool to sort of track and drive progress that it's been integrated into some national plans. So that's another example. And of course we love our fact sheet, so I have like a little handout about the motion tracker, and really encourage you to follow with our colleagues Samash about that. But those are some examples.
That's great, and it helps ground us in terms of what we're talking about.
How did I do with the acronyms? Pretty good, right? Spoken English.
So building on that, Christina, how do you think youth-led advocacy and accountability efforts are received by decision makers, right? Because we can put things into motion, we can have these amazing tools. We've been doing this for a long time, but how are these received by policymakers, by other stakeholders who are in positions of power, making the decisions, setting the budgets? Is there openness? Are you invited in proactively, or is this a battle?
Thank you. It's a good thing that we're talking about social accountability. So what you realize is that, for example, you talked about scorecards. Now, when we're doing scorecards, in terms of scorecards, it's more engaging because you need all the relevant communities at the table. So say, for example, it's a scorecard on sexual reproductive health and rights. You know that you can't create that without the presence of young people. You can't create that without the presence of the CSO. Actually, it's the people themselves writing down their problems, and then you have the local authorities or healthcare workers also drafting their own problems, and then you're opening a dialogue where people, discuss. So in that level, on that level of a scorecard, I'd say it's more engaging because you're there from the start. You are part of highlighting the problems. You are part of understanding why healthcare workers are not providing maybe, I'd say, services the way you want. Now, when it comes to when it goes higher now, let's say now we're talking about community-led monitoring. I can give an example of big community-led monitorings that are happening back in my country, even the one that is now well known happening under PEPFAR, the community-led monitoring, and there are other examples of community-led monitoring. Now, when we come to that picture in terms of youth engagement, is not so clear. Engagement is not really from the start. The arrangement is quite different. In this case, you already have CSOs, networks that are working around the community-led monitoring. So they follow up. They've been working, for example, with PEPFAR. Not very sure about Global Fund, but the initiative is the same, where you're bringing CSOs who've been in the space, have knowledge of how these programs run, and then they come together, and then they kind of network with communities. Now what happens is you have clusters of communities, right? So it's like they'll have a national level dialogue, and then you have a subnational level dialogue. You have clusters, but now youth are being engaged as recipient of care and not necessarily considered throughout, I'd say, a deliberate effort of including them throughout the whole process from the start, and make it clear to say we're bringing in young people so that issues to do with young people are well tackled, are well brought to the table. It's not as intentional. And I don't think that it was planned to be that way, but sometimes if we're not on the table as young people, it's easy to have these things overlooked. It does not mean that the what they're trying to do is not the right thing, but I mean, we're all human. So that's why we keep saying young people need to be at the table. It's not a matter of bringing us in as to just tick and say young people were there. Bring us in to work as partners, as equals, okay? Know that we also have skills to also deliver in the same space. So it's not I'm bringing you in the table to just test and see if you can do it or if you can manage, because that really comes out, and you might not say it with words, but it comes out and it affects delivery of that young person when brought to the table. So it shouldn't be, I'm on the table, 1. 2, now, okay, they've ticked, I'm on the table. Now I even have to fight to be on an equal on that table so that when I speak, my issues are heard. I mean, we really have to, and I keep saying this, and I think it's gonna be a song everywhere I go. We need to have a behavior change in terms of how we view young people. It's really something that really touches my heart when I go to meetings, and then the moment you're a young person, I'm telling you, the way you're even handled is different. But the moment you say, I'm a young professional, they handle you completely different. You know, they see you as someone who's an equal, someone who's able to bring substance on the table. So I see this in so many places, and for me, it really, I can't wait. I would love to see that behavior change, that bringing people on the table as equals, working together as equals, given the same opportunities as equals, the same opportunities given to CSOs are the same opportunities coming to young people, you know, and then working together as equals. That for me is my
I think we would. So building a little bit on some of these conversations and the work that you're doing specifically in sexual and reproductive health and rights. Can you talk to us a little bit about what the landscape is like in Malawi right now? What do you see as bright spots and as wins, and where do you see some of the gaps and challenges?
Looking at the track record in terms of sexual reproductive health service provision and how it has been throughout the years, I'd say successes have been there. Before growing up, we never used to have youth-friendly health corners. Now we have them. We never used to have a place where you can network and share ideas with other young people. Now we have that space. But as you move, and then you move from one hierarchy of, okay, we've achieved this, then there are more other work, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to ensure that really it's as inclusive as we want it to be. And unfortunately for us is that the natural disasters that we've had, I don't know if I should say unfortunately or fortunately, it's not good because some people are dying, they're losing lives. But at the end of the day, what this does is address gaps that are there. So I think for Malawi as a country, we've really faced it the past 2 years, from COVID to cholera to now Cyclone Freddy. Our government has really, especially the health sector, has really faced a lot of kicks that might have setbacks on what has been achieved so far. So in terms of sexual reproductive health and rights, there's still more investment that needs to be done in terms of not looking at sexual reproductive health and rights as just a standalone agenda, but understanding that it needs to be integrated throughout all the health programs. It's really key. And this comes out in all the, I would say, disaster response that we've had. Even the recent one, Cyclone Freddy, you'll see that the first thing, and we can't blame DODMA, this is the Department of Disaster and something affairs, sorry, not very familiar. Their response is more active in nature. I would say it's a disaster response. So their focus is making sure that people are moved from the disaster zone to a safe place. People have access to water. They have somewhere to sleep. They are not specialized to look at, okay, we can't put men, women, children, girls in one place. Their focus is not that. That's where now I think as CSOs and as youth-led organizations and the CSO youth-led organization, we have a very huge role in terms of helping through social accountability, helping and ensuring that really there is equal access and that these things are paramount and key to be addressed by the government. Otherwise, you find that they are put together, and this was the situation. People were put together, and now partners and CSOs had to come in and advocate and say, no, you need to separate them, you need to put them in different spaces. By this time, GBV has already taken place.
Right.
By this time, sexual exploitation and abuse has already taken place, and already that alone is a cost to the country, because you have to now offer extended services for the people who are victims of such nature. So just to say that we were doing great, but right now there's need, and maybe to point out that there's a PDNA, again, abbreviations that I have to remember, but just to put it lightly, is that it's an analysis of the impact of Cyclone Freddy. So maybe that report will bring out more information in terms of SRHR, and I know that there are teams who are keen on looking on those issues, gender, women, children. So maybe you can be on the lookout to read more about that report. But yeah, thank you very much.
So let's talk about the support networks to tackle some of these challenges, and knowing that this is also a long game. There are things that can be done in the immediate term, but the vision and the intention is a longer term engagement. As we noted, you've been a long-standing partner of ours, going back, I think, almost 6-7 years. And you belong to many civil society networks, and of course, as a result, also part of PAI's vast ecosystem of partners. I'd love to know what you think in terms of the advantages, the opportunities of being part of a global network, of an ecosystem of civil society advocates. Why would that matter if you think it does? And what has that enabled for young people, and particularly your own leadership in our sector?
It matters a lot. It matters a lot. In all essence, civil society organizations are by nature non-profit, which means we don't operate on profit. So usually you have to have money to do certain things that you want to do. And beside the point of money, we have the capacity building on the side. I remember when I started the youth-led organization in 2019, I was just a young girl with a passion. I did not know, I didn't have the skills of running an organization, but I had a passion. I knew there were problems. I knew that there were things that, we needed to tackle them, but I didn't know where I can learn from. I didn't have a platform where you would share ideas and I could hear from other countries and actually know that, oh my gosh, it's not just us. They're also facing the same problems, and also learning from how they were able to tackle those problems. That in its own creates a form of confidence in terms of as CSOs and going back to doing our work back in our communities. For me, being part of a global network really helped. It offered a platform of opportunities to be mentored. It offered opportunities to learn how other CSO youth-led organizations are able to find funding. It was an opportunity to also learn strategies that they have used to make sure that they are effective as CSO youth-led organizations in the space at a national level. So it created a platform of learning from people and able to go back and sit down and say, okay, let's try this. Okay, let's try that. Okay, there's something that they've said, and you share ideas and newsletters and you learn and you go back and say, okay, so it's possible to go to Ministry of Health as a young person and knock on the door and say, I want to see the director of planning, which is something that I would not have known. I wouldn't have gone there and knocked on that door. But through learning, I was like, wait a minute, it's my right. I can do that. So you eventually do that. And it's something that I'm seeing along the trends, because even looking at the social accountability thing and being a partner with PAI is that we have also learned that it's possible to do budget tracking. So for Malawi, we've been able to train youth leaders across the country in terms of public expenditure tracking, scorecards, and they're more like, they're vibrant now. You can see the hope in their face that they can do this work. They're eager to learn, and they're like, oh my gosh, so you're telling me that at a district level it's my duty to go find out how many, for example, maybe emergency pills are coming in, and to also track and say, how was this used? How much went to which facility? Was everything really, like, were young girls able to access, young women, were they able to access, to be able to have that dialogue with the health management teams at the facility, at the health post? That in its own, it's a transitioning of power in terms of how now young people view themselves as being civil participants in terms of holding officials accountable.
Thank you. Christina, I mentioned in my intro remarks that you've been part of and shepherded some incredibly impressive global coalitions and regional coalitions that have represented civil society, collective voice, and shared interests. And in addition to all of that experience, you're of course shepherding and supporting PAI's own ecosystem of civil society advocates. I'd love to hear from your perspective this collective view on why does fostering, why does investing, why does supporting a vibrant ecosystem of civil society advocates matter to the broader global movement?
That's a great question. I mean, and I really couldn't put it more beautifully than you put it when you can just picture and imagine. And you said something to me that's so striking, is you talked about a transition of power. So, you know, we're not just talking about people knowing and being able to claim their rights and, you know, health systems, laws and policies working for people, but the sense that, like, there's a transition of power, right? Where people feel empowered but are sort of structurally empowered to negotiate for what they want and need from systems. So I just want to say I think that's beautifully said. You know, I think that for us at PAI throughout my career, it's thinking about how to humbly figure out how can we sit alongside and in partnership and service to organizations like Christina's to really make sure that they are resourced, positioned, supported, to lead this work, right, in their own communities. And, you know, you've mentioned some of those core kind of building blocks. And, you know, one is, of course, funding to do the work. But I think often that's called project funding, which means, like, I want you to do A, B, C, and D by this date. But in the end, that's not what Christina's talking about. Christina's talking about vibrant, autonomous civil society that exists outside of project cycles, that have the space to listen deeply to people and citizens and figure out whether or not services are meeting their needs, and then negotiate for those changes and knock on that minister's door. And that's not a one-off thing. It happens over time. It happens with your organization having investment, not just in the project cycle, but what we call core operational or institutional investment, right? Where over time, you have the resources you need to build the skills you need, build the networks you need, that you then are also connected not just to organizations in your country, but even connected globally. So just to kind of answer your question, what can organizations like PAI should do is, again, be a really important resource partner, not just for project funding, but that core operational funding. And the other thing that I think is great learning for us and a pleasure, but I hear it also brings great value to you, is because we're sitting alongside such a vast network of experts and leaders, we can provide that connective tissue. Like you talked about learning from others about, oh, how do I negotiate this? And I'm doing scorecard, but I want to learn about budget tracking. So how could we provide simple systems to enable that connective tissue and learning and exchange? And also, and I think this is work that we'll talk about a little bit more, how can people work across organizations, even across countries, and set and share and advance shared agendas, right? So that maybe what Malawi and the DRC and Zambia and Mozambique need from their governments, there's also something that they need from the United Nations, there's something that they need from donors, and they can kind of come together around a shared agenda. And I think that kind of network strengthening is also really an important way to invest in civil society. And you know, there's one statistic that just sort of always strikes me, that again, it's not just about projects. There was a meta-analysis looking at the best, most progressive and effective policy frameworks to prevent and address gender-based violence. And the one factor that was consistent across all of these countries that had that was an autonomous, vibrant women's rights movement. So it wasn't NGOs who get project funding, it was that autonomous, vibrant civil society that has the ability to work with government, but also hold government accountable, even hold NGOs accountable. And so I feel like that's kind of, to me, a story that always really lands with me.
Thank you, Christina. And I think, you know, those stories are an example of how you're operating and how we as PAI are operating, and our principles of supporting this vast ecosystem that we have of our partners. I want to continue with you, Christina.
Okay.
Is this conversation, of course, is really timely, even beyond the World Bank Spring meetings. And it's because we, at PAI, we're very fortunate to have received one of our recent awards from the World Bank for the Global Financing Facility, really to support the advancement of priorities around maternal, newborn, child, adolescent health, sexual and reproductive health, and nutrition. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what this partnership is, what our role is, and what makes it exciting.
Okay, great. And we're very fortunate to have our colleague Stephanie with us from the Global Financing Facility, and of course, Christina's organization is a leader in this network. So just to back up a little bit, again, trying to make sure that we're not using words like Global Financing Facility, assuming everyone knows what this is. You've probably heard of something called the Sustainable Development Goals. It's a set of goals that the world invested in to really increase human rights, improve health by 2030. And several years ago, there was a recognition that we were really not making the progress we needed to make around sexual and reproductive health and rights, maternal health and rights, and newborn health. So donors, government, civil society came together and said, we need to double down and really raise more money to invest in these things to accelerate progress. And something came out of that called the Global Financing Facility. And it brings together donor governments like the Norways and the US's of the world, brings together national governments like Malawi, even the private sector, to say, let's invest in one plan in a country that we line up all of our resources to drive progress around these goals. This was so welcome, but what was realized soon after this was that civil society wasn't at the table in a meaningful way. So you were missing these key stakeholders who could tell you whether or not services were meeting people's needs. What were the real gaps? So I have to say, to me, this was almost a movement. Civil society got together and organized themselves really without extra funding and said, we welcome this, but we know you won't be able to deliver on these goals, and we won't be able to deliver for our constituencies unless we're at the table. So they formed something called the Civil Society Coordinating Group that collectively does advocacy to shape what the sort of priorities of Global Financing Facility are globally, but also in each country now, civil society is at the table. And just last year, the World Bank decided to actually say, okay, it's not just that civil society is important, but we know it takes resources and time to actually let civil society have the space to be at the table. So the World Bank made the second largest investment they've ever made in civil society leadership through this thing called the NGO host for the GFF. We were very fortunate to be selected to sort of be the platform for that work. And it includes providing support for this coordination group among civil society to sort of set and advance a shared agenda. Just to give a plug, we have a panel tomorrow at the World Bank that Christina is speaking on. So we're here, at the highest levels with decision makers asking for what people and communities need. Another thing that's very exciting is that this investment includes grants and pretty substantive grants to youth-led organizations and civil society organizations who are leading advocacy at the national level to make sure that these GFF investments, Global Financing Facility investments, meet the needs and rights of communities, but also, as Christina was mentioning, to track whether or not those translate into real changes over time, using things like the budget tracker. So we are really honored to be sitting alongside and providing a platform for that collective action, and also helping make sure that those resources are getting down to civil society and youth-led organizations at the front lines of the work. And I don't know if you want to add anything to what I'm sharing on this.
Well, actually, it's a great prompt because you're here in DC for many high-level conversations. You're speaking on various panels, moderating others. You also serve in a leadership role, and you're a member of this 400+ network of civil society organizations that are working together to advance sexual reproductive health for for women, for mothers, for young people, and of course nutrition as well as part of that. I'd love to hear from your perspective, what does the work in support of some of these GFF priorities really look like at the national level? What are community-based organizations like yours and others calling for, doing to advance this agenda to improve health and access for communities in Malawi?
So in the context of Malawi, it's more to do with bringing together same team of CSOs and CSO youth-led organizations that have been working on reproductive, maternal, newborn child health, plus nutrition. Oh my gosh, I always find
I
that
know.
awesome.
We love our acronyms.
Yeah. So the good thing about our team, and I'll speak from the perspective of CSO youth-led organizations, was to come up together. So even when I was talking about the mentorship with Grasa Michelle Trust, that was looking at building in-country, we used to call them social pacts, which are pretty much technical working groups, but it was more not to do like technical working group. It wasn't looking at creating a different arm. It was looking at creating a social pact in that sense, because it was bringing together different actors, different partners, and the conversation was transitioning to bringing in even private sector in certain groups. So you had the CSO, you had the youth-led organizations who are working on RMN-CAH plus nutrition. And then luckily that it was just that alignment as we were transitioning to GFF, CSO coalitions in country. It came upon the same structure that was already there in terms of RMN-CAH plus nutrition. So it was quite easy to create a platform because you already know each other, you've already been doing a lot of advocacy work together to sort of engage under one role. So not to lie, before it was very fragmented because obviously for CSO youth-led organizations, you are either maybe a part of this coalition and you work on that coalition. There was that, these ones are for that coalition. These are for that coalition, you know what I mean? There was no linkage, even though you're doing the same work. So what we then did was to bring everybody together. So it wasn't even a coalition per se, more like just creating a platform where we can have our advocacy issues put together, and then when we are engaging stakeholders and government, then it's that collective voice. So through the CSO youth-led organization, we transitioned now from just being, what was it before? It was, I'm trying to remember, it was a GFF youth coalition. So we later on transitioned to say, you know what, it's not about a coalition. It's not about limiting other people in this fight. You know, it's collective voice, it's advocacy, it's accountability, it's health financing, and at a national level, 1 voice, 2, 3, 5 voices are not enough. We need more collective voice where we have a youth leader that is sitting on the Global Fund pushing the same agenda, the same advocacy issues. You have another one sitting on malaria, or another one sitting on whatever platform, but we have that collective voice. So if we work together and bring things on the agenda, then it makes it more easier. So it has been really exciting for me and my fellow CSO youth-led organizations, in the sense that we're working with youth networks, we're working with youth champions across all sectors. We even have a team of vibrant young people who have been working on the corruption arm. Yeah, so Anti-Corruption Bureau. So it's that collective voice and bringing together, say, okay, so what are we doing next? And currently, while I'm here, they're going to be having a public expenditure tracking training of the whole team, so that they can go back and now start a collective voice, but with evidence and data from the ground. So to give you just a picture of what, as young people, we're trying to do, that is how it looks like. And the dream is that the way CSOs are put together, and you can say, okay, this is the CSO. We want the same kind of power and impact as CSO youth-led organization, to say they'll be like, oh my gosh, these are the young people. You know, we are qualified, we have done our research, we are linked to the right structures at a government level. The government knows us, they bring us to the table as partners who also know and are addressing issues that are happening on the ground. So it is a big dream, but we are hopeful and we're happy because back in Malawi, government recognizes us, the CSO do recognize us, and we have been trying to put that extra effort to say we as young people are ready and are able to do the work.
I have one more question, and then we're gonna open it to the floor. So be thinking about what you are curious about and wanting to ask either of our Christinas. So last question from me for you for this portion of the conversation. What do you see as the greatest needs, as the greatest opportunities to expand youth-led advocacy for sexual and reproductive health and rights?
A very good question. Well, I don't know if it's Africa, but Malawi, we have this saying that we always tell people to say all you want, because we don't want you to go back and burn your blankets because you have something that you wanted to say. So that is touching on what I wanted to say. I think for CSO youth-led organizations, one great, should I say impact, but one great need that we have is growth. And it stems from what Christina said, that it's just not about project-based funding. It's about growth. You know, how do we grow? How can we have a partnership that really builds our youth-led organizations, you know? And you will find that small youth-led organizations make a lot of impact. Mine is an example. You guys are gonna come and you're expecting an office full of, you know, a team of people or whatever, but in all honesty, we don't even have an office space. Literally, we are being housed by one CSO organization that gave us a room, but we're still able to make impact. We have a passion. Most of our members' work is voluntary. It's just young people who are passionate to do the work. And sadly, what I've seen is the trend is that you have so much passion, but then at the end of the day, passion can only take you so far. If you're not growing, you don't have that helping hand to put structures in place. Then later on, if one of your team members finds a job somewhere or plans to leave the country, that's where it ends. It does not mean that we lacked passion to push. It just means we did not grow beyond what we thought we were supposed to get to. So just to say that I think for as young people, as CSO youth-led organizations, what we need is that helping hand in growth. That partnership that is just not focused on project per se, but a partnership that really ensures that there's a mentorship and a smooth transitioning from a CSO youth-led organization to a complete CSO. So that transitioning is never there. So it's either that youth-led organization will die, they'll find jobs elsewhere, and then that's the end of it. And you're like, but they were making so much impact, what happened? So I think that's really a place that I see we really need more support.
I hope everyone heard that. So we'll open it up to the floor. Any questions? Eve.
Hi, so nice to see you. This has been wonderful. My name's Eve Brecker. I'm the Associate Director of our Civic Engagement Programming. I work on a project called the Reproductive Health Advocacy Partnership. We have 5 partners, 3 in Zambia and 2 in Malawi. Our 2 partners in Malawi are rock stars, and I'd love to talk to you about them later. I'm curious, some of the feedback I've received from our partners, the 2 in Malawi are youth focused but not youth led. And a lot of times I hear from them about how isolating that space is for a lot of the reasons you just discussed about how youth are treated differently even when they finally get to the table. I'm curious about just the larger like youth-led space, specifically in SRHR. Who do you consider your kind of peers in this space of the organization that you run? And can you just talk a little bit about like what it's like to work as a youth-led organization day to day.
Yeah, thank you for that very important question. I think that has been the case for some time, where you have vibrant CSO youth-led organizations, but being led by someone who's not youth. I would like to say I don't think in any way was it intentional to keep it like that. It falls down to the issues of capacity and having young people who are really vibrant, and how are they being mentored. You know, you can only make impact if you're mentored. So you'll find that the youth-led organizations that are really have leadership of young people do not really have that impact, because there's that bridging gap or ensuring that they grow to a space where they have impact was never there. So you would have maybe if that organization has funding, employing a professional who's going to help them grow, and then in the end they're making impact. When you find out it's not a young person, but in a way when you look at it on the other end, well, it's still helping that youth-led organization. So I think it depends on how you look at that prospect, but that has been the issue for some time. But now the trend is that you have youth-led organizations that are growing and that are upcoming. There are a few. You have Youth Wave, you have there's another one, Her Liberty, you have UCODE, you have Palombe Youth. There are several that I get. I'm just picking from the top of my mind. Not that I'm limiting anyone, but there are a lot of youth-led organizations that are now becoming active in the space, being recognized by the government as an arm that is important in terms of youth inclusion. So there's a growth in that aspect, and the fact that now we have partners, for example, like PAI, who are also focusing on I would say ensuring that CSO youth-led organizations are able to get funding, are able to make impact in the advocacy space at a national level. That also is adding to that group of more youth-led organizations coming on the table to play as partners in advocacy. So that's where I'm seeing the trend. But before, a youth-led organization was not able to get funding. I kid you not. You could not get any funding, because every funding was, do you have this in place? Do you have this in place? Now I'm new. I have a passion. I don't even know when you say administrative policies, what already you've thrown me. And then I look at that form, I'm like, I can't.
Yeah.
And then in the end, that's how it ended. But I'm happy to see how funding is transitioning to a space where you're really bringing up young people and giving them hope to say, we are ready to help you. You know, what is it that you need? You see that impact, you're coming on board and really providing that skill set that they need. If it's advocacy, helping them with that. If it's scorecard, giving them sessions on that. You know, building their skills, building their capacity, going past the funding itself has been really, really helpful, and would love to see more of that. Because at the end of the day, we don't want a handful of youth-led organizations that are doing well. If we're really to make impact, we need a whole lot of, you know, youth-led organizations making impact.
Jen, yes.
Just building off of what you were just saying, one of the things we've really been thinking about at PAI is what kind of strategic communication support youth-led organizations such as yourself might need. Obviously, you are extremely adept and skilled at working a room, at conveying what you need, and that is so essential, because if you're not communicating your message to the right audience in the right way and the right mechanisms, it can be challenging. So we're exploring how we might extend additional technical assistance to organizations such as yourselves. I'd just like to hear from you, based on your perspective of the gaps and the opportunities, what kind of strategic communications assistance and technical training do you think would be most beneficial?
I think right now, what I have seen working in that space of youth-led organization is that we do a lot. We have a lot of recommendations coming from the grassroots, but in terms of now uplifting that to a space where it makes impact, you know, how do we communicate our results? has always been a key area where I think as youth-led organizations we're not yet well skilled, and it would be great to have that that support in terms of how do you deliver your results, how do you communicate about yourself as a youth-led organization, what is your I would say publicity like? You know, are you out there? Are you seeing? What is the kind of support you would need? And I'll give a personal example because, you know, I have been in the space. There'll be times that, for example, you had maybe funding the previous year, so you were able to pay for the domain. You could search about All4Youth and you will find us. You'll be able to send emails to me and reach me on my you know, organizational email. But now when you don't have funding, you can't pay for that domain, you can't pay for that space. So I will come and speak, you will look for me, you won't find me. That becomes a problem. Is she singing a song? Are they really making impact? Is she doing what she's doing, or she's just come in a space and seen an opportunity and is selling herself? So it becomes really a gap for youth-led organization. So I think in terms of communication is also for partners and stakeholders to also be aware of that and really engage in youth-led organization to understand what are their key gaps. It goes beyond just the funding.
So many questions. Okay, I'm going to go to Sarah, then Rebecca, then Rawa, and Susan, I think.
Hi, I'm Sarah Reedy. I support the Learning and Exchange at PAI, and thank you for joining us. Very inspirational. Thinking about Navia's great takeaways from the World Bank, I was wondering, of the three, which you feel is most important to the youth-led organizations? Is it the transitioning of power, the alignment, or the equity?
A very interesting question. I'm thinking they're all good. Let's line them. You said transitioning of power, equity. What was the other one?
Oh, alignment.
Alignment. Transitioning of power, equity, alignment. All those are very key. But what's power without alignment? And what's equity without alignment? So I think maybe to be aligned in the right space would also bring the rest. The rest would come. Because, I mean, with power comes alignment. Those two are kind of like interrelated, and then equity comes afterwards. Unfortunately, equity is not just something that comes straight away. You know, it comes with impact, it comes with products. What have you been doing? You know, your work speaks for you and takes you there. So to answer that question is to put it like that. I don't know if I've answered your question.
No, that was good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rebecca.
Thanks so much, Christina. It's fantastic to hear more about the work that you've been doing in Malawi. One of the questions that I have, as somebody who comes out of, you know, having done a lot of youth activism myself, now many years ago, one of the inherent sort of issues is youth grow up. And obviously, as you've talked about, one of the fantastic things that we can do is make sure that we're finding ways to be able to keep those people within a movement and keep them engaged as advocates and, you know, maybe eventually even as policymakers and things going forward. But how do we do that other piece of how do we keep on bringing new youth into the discussion? How do we keep on bringing that new energy to younger and younger generations to keep sustaining that youth-focused piece?
That's a very, very good question that really comes close to my heart. And I say so because I saw that gap, okay? And obviously, I will also be transitioning soon, you know? I mean,
We'll
it
just
has-
move the age a little
It
bit.
But yeah, it's the same conversation because it's like, okay, you want to and this is mostly the case when you have like all these programs. They talk about we have this age limit 25, 24, 25, 24, without really transitioning.
Right.
So what most people do is they'll make impact within that period, and then after that it's like, oh, I've done my work, let me now find a better job, or advance my education, or it's something like that, but never really transitioning. So there's that gap, and then you'll find the next phase of youth leaders will also have to undergo the same trainings. It's like a never-ending cycle. So and I have always had a passion of mentorship. So I think what needs to happen there is, as young people, as we are getting older, as we are growing, let our skills be left behind. Also train others who are coming. Who have you trained in this space? Who are you living? When you leave that culture, right? The person you're leaving behind will also train another person, who will also train another person. You can learn from a few youth movements and youth-led organizations that have been standing for the longest time. And you realize the leaders left. What was the different thing that they were doing? Mentorship, keeping it alive. It wasn't about, I'll take my knowledge with me, you will see it for yourself. But it was, okay, this is what I have learned. This is how you do it. This space, learn, this is like this is like that. Okay, these are your allies, this you might have challenges with, but this is how you advocate and include them. So leaving that space where the ones you're leaving behind are more aware, and you're creating a generation of understanding that what you learn has to be also taught to the others that are coming before you. Just because you've undergone a budget tracking training, you've undergone policy training, you've undergone advocacy training, you cannot be the only star. So you go back and then you teach others, and then you'll find your impact is greater because you have a lot of people that know what you know. So it doesn't matter if you leave, you still have a network of young people who will carry on and pick from where you left, and then the trend goes on. That's actually my dream. So I really do a lot of mentorship and sharing of what I learned.
Fantastic, well, thank you for that.
Rolla.
Yeah, thank you very much for your interesting point of view. My question is, as you mentioned, meaningful participation of youth is very critical, and it should go beyond symbolic representation. And youth, both young and male youth, they should be engaged in planning, implementation process, in every stage of the process. That's very critical. But as part of this, I'm just wondering if there are opportunities for partnership, for intergenerational dialogue, so that both young and older people can exchange views, information, and it could also result in capacity building or opportunities for movements.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there are opportunities for intergenerational dialogue. And my other question is, youth, they are not homogeneous group, they are very diverse. As we know, there are young female youth,
Yeah.
male youth. Can you talk a little bit about the participation of young girls, young youth, in comparison with male youth? I think there is a difference in the difference.
Alright.
If there are commonalities or differences,
Yeah.
something like that. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I should have come here with a pen, but I think I'll remember the question. So on the first one, to respond to that, I think the space is there. It's a matter of how much are we utilizing that space, because we have, for example, in the case of Malawi, we have youth symposiums, where now you bring government, you bring partners, you bring even private sector to create an open dialogue with young people. At the end of such sessions, you have critical asks coming from young people in terms of what they want the government to do and who they want to make a decision. So there is that open dialogue. In terms of follow-ups and ensuring that commitment transitions to action, that would be a whole different story altogether. I don't know if it's to do with the kind of, again, I don't want to fall on funding just to bring money everywhere, but I'm speaking to fellow CSOs So you know that to engage after a commitment also requires resources. You know, you need to meet, you need to follow up, and in order to engage and have a dialogue with most of the government officials, it's costly. So you'll find that most organizations fail to transition beyond that. I think that is an open dialogue that I would be willing to hear more about in terms of maybe other countries that are doing better in how they're doing it. But I'm always seeing that that's where the fallback is. How do we move and then beyond, you know, the good dialogue to really pushing certain items to action? So you'll find that at the end it's fragmented. Only those organizations maybe that have the support to track certain commitments will track them and push them into action. But it's not going to be the whole dialogue in its diversity, as you have said. Now to go to your next question about young people, male and female. I think naturally before you would see a lot of male advocates, you know, young people who are male, you know, speaking out. But now there's such diversity that you can't really, it's hard to tell. There's such diversity. I have friends of mine, young girls who've made so much impact, both globally and at a national level, and they continue to do so as they transition. So in terms of advocacy, I don't want to use the word empowerment, but in terms of advocacy and power, I'm seeing more young girls come out and speak out. I'm seeing more young girls willing to move their agenda of what they know. I'm seeing more young girls who have survived teenage marriage come out and speak out. I'm seeing girls who have been abused and were victims for such a long time and are now survivors. They are coming out and speaking out to other young people. I'm seeing young people living with HIV speaking out and saying it's possible to have a life after HIV. So I think there's a change of a narrative there in terms of how you see young people between the ranges of male and female in terms of advocacy. Now, if we go on the disease burden, that's a whole different story altogether. Yeah.
Susan.
Hi, Susan Patterson. I sit on the communications team, and thank you again for sharing your thoughts with us today. And there was one thing you referenced I was really interested in learning more about, and that was how the network, maybe within Malawi or within the region, is helping strengthen your work and helping all the individual CSOs and youth-led organizations strengthen their work. And I'm wondering if you can share a specific example of how maybe collaborating with another or the group of the coalition network of CSOs and youth-led organizations led to a specific, maybe an advocacy win or making progress on a specific issue.
Okay, that's a good question. And yes, I can give an example on that. During COVID, so before under the, I would say GFF, yes, because global platform, it is a global platform. Before we would engage, we would have opportunities of meeting at one of the big events. It could be the replenishment where you would share ideas. But now COVID hit and you were not able to go anywhere. And already at that point, we were at a point where we were advocating for young people to be supported. You know, we were able to speak out and have a one-to-one conversation with donors. Now we don't have that opportunity. Now we have to go online and have our asks, flashed there, which is not the same, because at least when you're talking to them, they kind of get that feel of where you're coming from, and you're able to explain more than just, the message itself. So what we started was now have open dialogues on WhatsApp. So would bring, for example, I remember that time we could not get funding. The only organization that was able to get funding was from a youth-led organization from Senegal. So we were like, okay, so how can we get funding? And at this point, you are pointed out to be a youth representative for your country. So now you have a push to say, okay, so what are you doing? You are there representing young people, but what are the products? And you can't say, no, I'm not being supported. I mean, you were chosen because you were vibrant, so that vibrancy has to continue past the selection. So we shared, and they were able to share. They say, okay, no, we came up with a proposal. We went to so many places to ask for funding, including approaching PAI for help in terms of how can we, I don't want to use the word sell ourselves. How can we sell our proposal? Like, what are the platforms where we can engage in and really get support in such a time where funding is dwindling, because every country was looking at recovery after COVID. So they shared that, and through their sharing, it sort of gave us hope to say, oh my gosh, so we can push ahead and be able to get funding. And I remember this was 2020. From their lesson, when it was 2023 now, I have to remember that. When we were in 2021, we were able to get funding. Why? Because we were given hope that you don't have to wait until you see the call to say, okay, they're calling for funding A, B, C, D. No, you can literally have your proposal in hand and go knock and say, we have this problem. It needs to be sorted despite, COVID. And SRHR issues were pretty high issues to be tackled during COVID-19. So we were able to get that funding from their lesson, from them opening up to say we were able to get support from such an organization to help us with writing a proposal, which in turn also helped us in writing the same proposal that helped us to get funding. So just to share how information sharing could really help other youth-led organizations in getting support.
Thank you.
We're approaching time, but we'll have a few minutes with Christina later, so all of you should feel free to continue to engage. I want to thank you both for your time, for your insights, for your calls to action, and clearly there's so much more to be done, not only to tackle the gaps and the threats in Malawi, abroad, even here in the United States, but also ensuring that inclusive, representative, and aligned community voices are driving change forward. I wrote so many quotes and so many points that you raised, Christina, but one that really stands out right now in this moment is you can have so much passion, but passion only takes you so far. And I think the areas of need and opportunity that you raised for your organization, for youth-led advocacy, for civil society in Malawi, I think resonate and align to what the collective space needs. And that is very much around the right investments, the right level of investments, the right mind frame and orientation of how those investments are made. The flexibility, not only in funding, which I'm very proud that at PAI our funding is flexible. Sometimes our big donors have their own mandate and their own requirements, but we try our best to ensure that our funding to partners is flexible and that we're supporting institution building. Things that may not be exciting and may not be the quick win, but we know that organizations need the support to set up a finance system, need the support to ensure that professional development is there, and so on and so forth. And that is a personal commitment of PAI that we continue in that route. And above all else, the trust in the abilities, the trust in our collective abilities, not coming to the table of come and prove yourself, but you're coming to the table because you have the experience, you're engaging in substantive change. So let's add the other barrier of we've invited you, you're so fortunate, prove yourself to us. The trust is so important. I always say that civil society members are truth seekers, truth speakers, and the protectors of progress. And both of you could not be better examples of that. So I thank our PAI team, I thank our board members, I thank our guests who joined us today. Also appreciation to the World Bank who made your trip possible. I think all of us have grown beyond measure having you, inspired us and enabled us to continue this fight forward together. So I appreciate your support, your partnership, and your friendship with PAI. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.